Hey guys, it's David from X-Wing Versus, and I am finally back in my first episode of X-Wing 2.0 to share my TIE Punisher build. The TIE Punisher, at least my understanding is, it's more common than it was in the first edition, which means it's actually played or seen. In my first game of X-Wing 2.0, my opponent said he never saw them, so maybe it's just in certain areas where the podcasters I listen to said it's more common. But so that might be subject to interpretation, but one thing is for sure, the TIE Punisher is much better than it was in the first edition. This is because the chassis is a bit more well, it's not really durable. The stat line hasn't changed, but the important thing is the reload action because it carries so much ordnance. And then especially with red line, you get a free target lock after any action. And in a standard TIE Punisher, you can boost into a red target lock, so that's pretty handy. So for the build I want to share with you guys, it will be starring the TIE Punisher, of course, and it'll be piloted by Redline. If you know anything about TIE Punishers these days, you know Redline is by far the best pilot. That's because after he performs any action, he can acquire a target lock. And one really cool thing that was pointed out to me, because it's may acquire a target lock, it's a free action basically. So he can do a red action such as a barrel roll and still be able to perform that target lock action essentially. And so that's super critical because let's face it, the TIE Punisher is an ordnance carrier, and Redline, he is there to dispense that ordnance. Alright, so going through my cards here, I'm going to start off with homing missiles. So homing missiles are the cheapest missile in X-Wing, and my understanding is that missiles aren't that popular, and looking at the homing missile I can see why, because your opponent has the option to either suffer 1 damage instead of attempting to roll for damage, and I could see why that is a bit of a problem. But I think so long as you're for the most part targeting small ships, which for the most part have less health, I feel like that's a pretty good trade-off. It's essentially, in my mind, I think of it as like a twin laser turret. You roll 3 dice just to see if it could hit once. Granted, you performed that attack twice, but if you were doing Marana Donnie, you'd roll 1 less to reroll your shields anyways. So point is, there has been precedent for players accepting 1 practically guaranteed damage per round. So I think the same can be said for the homing missile, and the entire point of this build that I was going for was just to put out damage, and you'll see why in a moment. So for me, that 1 damage is good enough. And keeping with the ordnance, the other piece of ordnance I'm carrying is advanced proton torpedoes. I was debating between this one and cluster missiles. And really what it came down to was I wanted advanced proton torpedoes because they just deal so much damage, rolling 5 dice, and just it's a bit limiting because it's not only is range 1, but it's a charge of 1. But at least this way I have all of my all the ranges covered. And I mean, if you're able to get off your advanced proton torpedo, your opponent's day 99% chance is going to be ruined, especially with the additions of seismic charges. So TIE Punisher, it still retains the comms, that radar looking slot, and so you can then take the trajectory simulator and sling that damage forward. If you see my channel before, you know I use that a ton with my TIE Punisher, so you can still do that. But one key difference is if you sling that bomb forward and then the TIE Punisher moves 1 forward, you will be within range 1 of your bomb. So that damage is going to come to you, and that's why ablative plating is necessary. So that way you can attempt to mitigate that damage, but I think it's really powerful because you can, using that seismic charge, zone out that area so your opponent doesn't really want to be there, and then you can surprise them by, like I said, if you go range 1, if you go speed 1 forward, you're going to be in range of your bomb. So you might as well go 3 forward, get super close, and if necessary, boost then target lock, and then release your advanced proton torpedoes and just light them up. It's pretty fun. And then to help deal more damage, I include the fifth brother, who can, while spending his force token, he can change a focus token into a critical result. When I did my practice game, actually I rolled really well, so I never needed to use this ability. But it was nice having that force token for defense. So that's really the only weakness of the TIE Punisher, is it only has one agility die, so you don't have a whole lot to try and mitigate damage, but at least the TIE Punisher still has a ton of health. Alright, so that's the TIE Punisher. And so what does my escort look like in this build? So it is all TIE fighters. So in a way you can think of this as a mini swarm because there are only 5 ships. So Gideon Hask is the first TIE fighter in the escort group, and I brought him because he rolls an extra attack die when an opponent is damaged. So that's another reason why I settled, if you will, for the homing missiles, because so long as my opponent is damaged, meaning they have a damage card, and I'm guaranteed to keep dealing damage with the advanced homing missiles, then Gideon Hask will be able to use his ability. So that's pretty handy. And then I have Marana, who is basically the new Wampa, if you remember X-Wing 1.0, where she can cancel one critical result to deal 1 damage card. And that is super deadly. And to help it be even more deadly, I gave her Trick Shot. So that way, if she's obstructed from her target in any way, she gets to roll an extra attack die to make that even more of a possibility. And you notice I gave it to all of my aces, just so that way, it's just 1 point. It's a 1 point upgrade, or at least currently it's still a 1 point upgrade, and then it just gives them an extra attack die. So it just gives me that security there. And then my last skilled, if you will, named TIE Fighter pilot is Scourge Scutu, and his ability, if you can't read it, is he can roll an extra attack die against opponents in his bullseye firing arc. And lastly, I have Wampa, just at pilot skill 1, and he can spend 1 charge to roll an extra attack die if he hasn't been fired upon. So as you can see in this build, especially this TIE Fighter section, everyone can either roll an extra attack die. In the case of Marana, she is guaranteed damage if she has a crit. So the damage output is already pretty strong, and then on top of that, everyone except Wampa has Trick Shot. So just the damage output is immense in this build. During my practice game, there wasn't a single turn where I rolled only 2 dice. Every time I was rolling 3 dice with TIE Fighters. So that felt pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. And all these TIE Fighters, especially because they can roll an extra attack die for just being a TIE Fighter, it kind of helps distract my opponent, their focus. So that way they have to focus on all these little threats that could potentially be the dagger in their back if they don't focus on them. And then if they're focused on these little daggers, then they're missing the giant wrecking ball coming to their face, which is red line. So, and another tip for this, I kept, in terms of placement, I kept Gideon Hask by Marana, because I figured she was the most likely one to be able to deal damage to an opponent, because she can even deal that damage when they're still shielded, just because of how her ability reads. So I put them together. And then Wampa, I put on one side of the board, and because he's pilot skill 1, I can then see where my opponent's deploying. And then I can put Marana with Gideon on a different side, on opposite sides, so that way they have to commit to only 1. And then usually somewhere in the middle, I'll put red line, so then that way he just has an option to go wherever he wants, and wherever makes sense, wherever the opportunity lies. And Scourge, I kind of just put him wherever, because he's also pilot skill 5, so just wherever the need is, that's where I place him. And that's another power in this build, is there are 2 level 5, initiative 5 pilots. Basically, they're aces. Yes, there's pilot skill 6, which is higher, but I just refer to them as the super aces because there's very few pilots in this game that have Initiative 6. So, in my mind, being Initiative 5 is pretty darn good and makes you an ace. And on top of that, like Saint Marana and Gideon, being at Initiative 4, that also isn't bad. So this build is pretty strong. So in addition to the weakness of the TIE Punisher's lack of agility, the only other weakness I see in my build is that it comes in at 200 points, which the initiative bit is very important just so Redline can react to my opponent. So sometime in the future, don't be surprised if I come out with another iteration of this build that addresses that. But nonetheless, this build was super fun. I would rate it as fun but deadly. So it's great for local tournaments, great for your friends if they want for a bit more competitive match. I can't say bring it to a tournament because you're not guaranteed the initiative, which is very important to make this build work, but I can guarantee you it'll be a fun time. So let me know in the comments down below if you have any of those questions or any of those challenges for me. I always read the comments. So just go down there, let me know. If you like this video, please leave a like. And also, if you like this type of content, please subscribe. I really like to bring builds that shake up the meta. So if you want creative builds and that help you see X-Wing in a new light, this is the channel for you. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.